Karl, I just wondered if you might be able to start by introducing yourself and your expedition.
Okay, my name's Karl Bushby. I have been walking around the world on somewhat of an extended journey for the last 21 years. The mission objective, shall we say, was to get from the southern tip of South America back to London unassisted by any form of transport. So yeah, I'm allowed to walk, I'm allowed to swim, and that's it. We kind of framed this journey, shall we say, with two rules to define it. And that was two simple rules at the beginning, being that I'm not allowed to use any form of transport to advance, and I'm not allowed to go home until I arrive on foot, thereby kind of cementing ourselves into this deal. All sound very simple 20 years ago.
Tell me what gave you the idea in the first place.
I think there's two halves to this. There is the fact that I've always had a fascination for horizons. I get a kick, a real buzz out of a good horizon. And that's always driven me. And the other part of this was the army, whereby I never really felt like I'd shown my full potential. I was challenged, and I wanted to go out there and make a big statement. And I literally just picked the longest, greatest challenge I could find and kind of said, right, I'm going to go and do that. And the further into this you get, the more there is to lose. So, 6 years into this, having stuck to those two rules, to then let it go is to fail.
Did you know, or did you imagine at the beginning of this journey how long it was going to take?
Well, we did the math. The math said 12 years.
Yeah.
However, there was a big unknown, and that was, at the time, the unknown was the Bering Strait.
Yes.
It was pure theory at the time.
Just remind me how long you've taken. You've taken 21 years.
Yes.
Now. So that's been extended by 7 years already. Can you give me an idea now what your expectation is, how many more years will take you to get back to England?
Oh, again, if you do the math, I'm 2 years from home.
Okay. So you're really on the home straight.
We have this terminology in the parachute regiment called ground rush, where when you're parachuting, you think you've got forever, then suddenly the ground's there and whack before you know it.
Yeah.
It comes up real quick. And it's kind of felt like that the last year or so, whereby home has always been so far away that it wasn't worth thinking about. Like you just didn't go there. It was the day to day. And then suddenly you're like, wait, home is getting close. And there's all these kinds of weird mixed emotions and feelings getting dug up now, where it's like, crap, this thing might actually finish one day.
Yes, you couldn't perhaps just outline some of the obstacles that you've overcome. 21 years, that's a long time. So maybe you could just highlight a couple of things which have been really, maybe touch and go, I don't know.
Challenges come in different forms. The physical challenges, again, you're looking at the Darien Gap was one of those main challenges. And then, of course, there was Alaska, which was a huge challenge. That was incredibly difficult to get across Alaska in a winter. That was a real learning on the job, a real in-your-face experience. And then, of course, the Bering Strait.
Yes.
And then we had to deal with Russia. That was a huge problem. So once we were into Russia, I felt remarkably relaxed because we, at that point, achieved something. We'd achieved what really the crux of the expedition was, getting across the Bering Strait, because that had literally been theory for so long. And no one had made it from Alaska to Russia.
That was the first.
Said you're an idiot. Yeah. Everyone said, no, forget it, you're not going to be able to do it. Guys who, done the poles, done Everest and whatnot, guys with real backgrounds and real credentials had tried and failed miserably.
Yes.
So when me and Dimitri turned up, who barely knew anything about this place, and just said, we're going to go and do it, everyone's like, you're going to get yourselves killed. Or nobody took it seriously. And so to achieve that first time, and then find yourself in Russia, even though I'm in the jaws of the FSB, and I'm in court, being put on trial, and I'm just kind of staring into space thinking, well, who cares? Because, what I've just done was amazing.
Yeah.
Do
you know what you did differently, Karl? How were you able to do it when many people with, you know, cold experience, polar experience weren't able to do it?
A lot of it's luck, but I think we also had the right strategy as well, which was a much more direct, aggressive strategy. So we'd looked at what everyone else was doing, and they tried because the Bering Straits is such a dynamic environment. You've got a lot of moving ice, everything's shifting all the time, and a lot of the approaches other people would take is to try and kind of maneuver around the open water. Mm. We decided, look, you can't do that. You've just got to be able to figure out how to go direct. You've got to be as comfortable in the water as you have out of the water, which is difficult. So there's some serious technical things there at temperatures, you know, -20, -30. The ice on the Bering Straits is mostly driven by wind. That's what makes it so dynamic. Wind and currents. And we had just, you know, a week of just almost no wind, which is almost unheard of. And this is like the windiest place in the world out there. And so, you know, it was, and then we had temperatures that were originally at about 0 degrees C, dropped to about -32 to -35. And that started to put a surface on the sea ice. Okay. It was literally like Moses watching the Red Sea part at that point. I mean, literally, we're trapped on the Alaskan side of the data line there, and we watched things change, and then suddenly we were able to get and start moving in the right direction, and become unstuck.
Yeah. What I'm interested in, Karl, though, is the mindset and the attitude that you were repeatedly being told that it was impossible, and in fact there was everybody's evidence would suggest that was the case, that nobody had managed to do it so far. So where did that positivity come from, and that belief that you were able to do that?
Yeah, we hit the ice with the full intent to give it everything we had.
Yes.
But in the back of my mind, I didn't think that was going to happen.
Yes.
And nor did anybody else. So but yet we had the right attitude. We didn't hit that ice thinking, let's just give it a go. It was, let's take this very seriously. Let's not go out there and mess around a bit and figure out, see if things work, and then come home. Yeah. And we went for it, and that, you know, ultimately, you know, got us where we wanted to be. But it surprised me as much as it surprised everyone else. That's just.
I think the mindset really interests me. You know, reading your book, you're very delightfully open about the highs and the lows. And you just mentioned now, you know, there were some very, very tough periods in that, which makes it feel to me like this might be accessible to anybody. You know, it's not just for somebody who's made of steel, who can crash through everything. But there are moments when you really do have to fight out of the dark place in order to be able to continue. Would that be how you would see it? And have you learned a lot through that journey?
Yeah, I certainly don't see myself as anything in any way exceptional. I mean, I'm not. On paperwork, I'm definitely not. So yeah, could anybody else achieve what I've achieved? Yeah, absolutely. The guy, you know, any guy sitting next to me in any bar could probably pull this off with a bit of focus. Like, you don't have to be remarkably fit to achieve what I've done, be it the Darien Gap, be it the Bering Strait. A little bit of luck always helps, but certainly the right attitude from the get-go.
Yes, attitude very important. And can I throw in another word there? I would argue that a degree of courage. I mean, the Darien Gap sounded extremely dangerous and frightening.
The Darien Gap was frightening. And there were a couple of points there, a couple of times there. And this is where I think maybe the conditioning, certainly within the army, helped. Yeah. Certainly as a younger man, having been well conditioned in the regiment, you half the time did feel bulletproof. That gives you the confidence. So I guess in countering everything I've just said about anyone could do it, I guess that experience certainly brought something to the table. And the other thing was that within the regiment, I had been pushed to my limits repeatedly, to the point where I knew where my limits were to within a very tight measurement. Having spent like a year and a half in the in the depot parachute regiment as in recruit company, I'd been just run into the ground. I cannot count how many times I woke up in the med center with 2 IVs in each arm and then go out the next day and do it again. So I had a really good idea where my limits were. And I think that really helps as well.
Yes.
Not a lot of people know where their limits are. They haven't gone there, and especially repeatedly to the point where you understand it like a science.
Yes.
I think that helped in this case as well.
And do you think you pushed yourselves to those same limits again, for example, in the Darien Gap?
Yeah, Darien Gap, definitely. I mean, Darien Gap was destroyed me trying to get through that jungle. That was a tough one. Yeah. I'd say physically and mentally, that's one of the toughest things I've done.
Do you want to just describe that a little bit? What you had to endure there?
Well, the Darien Gap was a combination of things. It was, first of all, you had this really tough terrain. Once you get into the Darien Gap, you're into really dense secondary jungle, which is basically overlaying swamp and river system. There's no way through there. That would be challenging enough on its own on foot without, being able to use any transport. Because anybody who goes into the Darien Gap, you go in by boat. You get through it by boat. So to get from the Colombian side all the way through, it's very challenging physically. But on top of that, you got this political situation, which it was a war zone at the time, and that Darien Gap, defines the front line between what was FARC fighting the Colombian government and the right-wing paramilitaries, the auto defenses. So, and there's nothing but horrifying stories of bodies being pulled out of the Darien Gap, backpackers and locals alike. All that's on the back of your mind. And literally, at one point, you are walking past the Colombian army who are dug in defensive positions, defending villages, to get down a single decaying track to get to another village that is occupied by the military and right-wing paramilitaries, but under siege by FARC, who own the track and everything around it. You've got to get through that on your own in the middle of this jungle in Colombia, and it's a little bit alarming. And the fact that you can't use any tracks that are there, so you're going to have to cut your way through that jungle to avoid trying to be captured by the guerrillas. And it was totally overwhelming. I mean, the first thing that happened was that you had something called terrain shock, which is like claustrophobia, where everything's so close that you have no idea where you're going, where you just come from. And you would become disorientated by just bending down and standing back up and not having any idea where you're going, where you come from. And you're constantly dealing with that. And then it's just dusk till dawn. I remember just with a machete trying to get through that gnarly place.
And yet you do pick yourself up and keep going.
Wait, the only other choice is to die at that point. So you don't have much,
yes.
you don't have much of a choice.
Yes.
There's no stopping at that point because you've got to get to that next village. That's it.
Yeah. And I think that's often the case, isn't it? That sort of resilience comes from lack of options quite often.
I mean, if you want to succeed, put yourself in a position where you have to.
Yes.
And then I think at that point, humans really find their full potential. I think one of the big things about people as well is we constantly underestimate ourselves.
Yes.
That is something that I think we're all guilty of. And I think, again, once you really understand where your limits are, that really helps to overcome that issue, because we really, really do underestimate ourselves.
Yeah, well, that's so interesting, isn't it? As you say, knowing your limits, you pushed it, so you have that depth of resource to dig deep and find the strength to continue. And it's comforting to know that we as human beings have that, not always having been tested, but that it is there for us to do that. I was really interested as well about this idea in terms of scenario planning. The idea that you had a destination and you knew where you wanted to go, but you didn't know necessarily the detail of how you were going to get there. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, you know where you're going to go, but the details might be fuzzy.
Yes.
We embrace that in a lot of environments, especially the military. Everything has to be written in such detail, and things like business plans, which are really just a terrible idea for the most part, especially when you're trying to, dot every I and cross every T. Great. I mean, psychologically that might help some people, but real world, this doesn't work. And I think you really need that flexibility. And I think you need to embrace that flexibility from the get-go. Otherwise, you're going to find you hit almost self-made problems. Some of those obstacles probably aren't real. I mean, we literally create these constructs where something appears to be a challenge or a problem or an obstacle when it actually isn't. And we've hemmed ourselves in because we've defined these really tight rules. We need to be a lot more flexible, a lot more fluid, and then the world looks. There are many more options, appear visible when you do that might not have been otherwise.
And that again is a mindset, is it not?
That is a psychological issue. We hem ourselves in psychologically, and I think if we adopt a more fluid, flexible approach from the get-go, then it kind of removes a lot of those blinkers. So I think that's important as well, that you really have to embrace that flexibility.
And arguably right now where we are, in an utter change to the whole world, it is those with that mindset who are going to be better prepared for it and better equipped, rather than thinking that everything is going to carry on as it was. Clearly it isn't now, and we don't know how it's going to emerge the other side of this. I was interested as well, reading your book, you had fabulous support from your parents, and those relationships must have been important, I would imagine, to have that sense of people who are behind you, and not just in will, but actually in action quite often. Your father sending you packages and, a new tent and sleeping bag and such like. How important was that in the whole journey?
It's absolutely critical. I mean, you're not doing this on your own, which is why I always refer to this as a we thing.
Yes.
The royal we. It is. I mean, it's not just my parents. It's everybody I met along the road. The people who fed me, the people who housed me. I've had people nurse me back to health. The entire planet has been one giant support structure so far, and that's been fantastic. And that's been one of these real revelations where I think, when having left the army and not seeing the best of humanity, and then being back on the ground and instantly had, a lot of people jump in and help me, from the poorest of the poor to the wealthy, not just my parents as well, but everyone I've met on the ground to some degree, and that reaffirms your belief in humanity, so to speak. If you watch the 24-hour news cycle, the world is a terrible place to live. That's just not the case.
Yes.
And I think that's a very important message as well. I get the pleasure of standing in front of school children a lot and talking about this, which is, I think, something that really needs to be rammed home. The fact that humanity is 99.9999999% good.
Yes.
I can literally, in 21 years on the road, I can literally count the bad guys on one hand.
Yeah.
That's pretty good going.
Yeah, it's a very, very strong, very lovely message, and gives you confidence for this last leg. Can you just bring us up to speed now, Karl, where you are and, what is next?
Yep, so we're on the border with, we're inside Turkmenistan on the border with Iran. And basically we have to get permission to walk through Iran. And that's a little tricky with a British passport. So because I have a UK passport, then I'm not allowed to just wander into Iran freely. I have to be part of some organized tour. I need a guide or an escort. And normally that would be over, a week or so period. It'd be an organized trip. So to ask them nicely if I can just spend months walking freely through their country is proven to be a bit of a challenge. So yeah, it was complicated and difficult right up until the point when then the virus kicked in and the borders closed. Okay. And now I'm just in the same boat as everyone else.
You haven't touched, I haven't asked the question, but the endurance day after day after day on dusty roads and hungry and pulling your beast, as you called it. I mean, how did you keep going through that time?
It was this simply, best I can say, it was the job. It was what was expected. It's what you had to do. And, I would get a little kick, I think, every day as well. At the end of the day, if you'd done your 30 kilometers, and I'd get my map out, and then I would mark where I was on that map. And just to see that little movement, you get a little kick. Finishing a day, marking that map, made progress.
Yeah.
Next day, let's do it again.
Yes.
And, you'd just be able to keep that going.
So, Karl, you've had the most extraordinary journey, a most extraordinary life that stretched, this journey stretched over 2 decades, and it's come from a very interesting life before that as well. And many people will watch this and think, well, that's totally different from what I've experienced. But right now, we're all in the same boat with the ambiguity of where the world is going, the waiting game. You're sitting here waiting for the next step, waiting to see if you can get into Iran. And you have had this tremendous experience where lessons have been learned. And is there anything that you would like to say to people to help them through this particular period from what you've learned on your journeys?
Again, depending on the situation you're in, but as far as losing a job, losing a business, nobody's going to quit. There's no quitting. You're in a position like me in the Darien Gap. You can't just sit there and die. You've got to do something. And I think it really is just expanding. You've got to broaden your horizon. Whatever it is you're thinking about, what you can do, what skill set do I have? What are my possibilities? To as much as you can kind of just inch that vision a little wider, I would recommend doing that. So I think with enough drive and determination, there's always another day. Somehow you'll figure it out. It may take a while, there are going to be some dark days, but no, it's going to happen. Know that the sun will rise.
Yes. I think that's very wonderful. I think listening to you, what I've taken away is that clarity of vision is always incredibly helpful. Huge amount of patience. Nothing's necessarily done in the time frame that you want. The positivity. I mean, you have gone low. This is not, you're not made of steel. You're human like the rest of us, but you've picked yourself back up and got in the saddle, as we say, and kept going, which I think is a tremendous strength. And the flexibility as well, to look at different ways to overcome obstacles and come around obstacles. But personally, I love too that idea that doing what is true to you, people recognize that, and people come together to support each other. And if there's any time that we need to do that, it's now. None of us are alone, and actually we're all together in this crisis. I like to think, I'm always the optimist, something positive will come from it.
Yeah, I think this is a wake-up call to the fact that we are very closely related. We're all in the same living room right now.
Yes.
You can't isolate yourself in a corner. You have to think bigger. And certainly for someone who's been out there in the world for so long now, where the concept of home has become such a vague, misty concept. It's, even nationality now for me. And hopefully, what's happening right now will bring some of that home.
Thank you, Karl.